How did the youngest female fraudster, just 19 years old, whose business idol was Steve Jobs, manage to attract around $900 million in investment over just 10 years for an idea that initially seemed promising? Among the investors she attracted were even experienced entrepreneurs and politicians, including former U.S. President Bill Clinton. By 2015, Forbes had named her the youngest self-made female billionaire. Journalists estimated that the net worth of her assets at that time was $4.5 billion. This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, who literally built her business on blood. Elizabeth Holmes was born in 1984 in Washington, into the family of a high-ranking official, a former vice president of Enron, an employee of a congressional committee. From an early age, Elizabeth dreamed of creating something truly important that would make her rich. "All I really want out of life is to discover something new," she wrote in a letter to her father at the age of 9. Medicine was the girl's second passion. After graduating from school with top marks, Holmes wanted to become a doctor. But because she was afraid of needles and the sight of blood, she decided to enroll in the chemical engineering program at Stanford University. Despite this contradiction, her interest in medicine did not disappear. On the contrary, it evolved into a desire to change the very approach to treatment and diagnosis. Holmes increasingly found herself thinking about why such important procedures as blood tests remained complicated, painful, and inaccessible for many people. She studied chemical engineering at Stanford, but at the age of 19 she dropped out to democratize healthcare, to make blood testing fast, cheap, and accessible without doctors. And that was how her first startup emerged, the medical diagnostics company Theranos. The name combines the words therapy and diagnosis. Her decision to leave one of the most prestigious universities in the world seemed risky, but it matched the spirit of Silicon Valley, where such moves were often seen as a sign of determination and confidence in one's idea. At that moment, Holmes was convinced that she would be able to create a technology that would change medicine in the same way technology had once changed communication, transportation, and access to information. Holmes's central idea was to create a technology capable of diagnosing any disease from a single blood test taken from a finger with a tiny needle. The concept sounded revolutionary. Instead of complicated laboratory procedures, multiple vials, and a long wait for results, one drop of blood and instant diagnostics. Holmes claimed that her technology would be able to test dozens, and eventually even hundreds, of indicators at the same time, from glucose and cholesterol levels to the detection of cancer and infectious diseases. All of this was supposed to happen quickly, cheaply, and without the involvement of doctors, completely transforming the traditional system of medical diagnostics. In her vision, a person could walk into a regular pharmacy, provide a finger prick blood sample, and receive a full analysis of their condition within just a few minutes. This meant not only convenience, but also the possibility of early disease detection, which could potentially save millions of lives. The idea looked especially appealing against the backdrop of the existing system, in which blood tests required complex equipment, qualified personnel, and significant expense. Theranos promised to make healthcare accessible, fast, and personalized. It was precisely this combination of simplicity, scalability, and global importance that made Holmes's concept so compelling that not only investors, but also major corporations began to believe in it. In just 3 years, the startup managed to transform from a bold idea conceived during Elizabeth's time at Stanford University into a real product that attracted the interest of a multinational corporation. What had recently existed only as a concept and a set of laboratory developments was gradually taking the shape of a technology that could be shown to investors and potential partners. Before long, news of the successful presentation reached company management as well. Information spread quickly, and interest in the project grew not only among people in tech circles, but also among experienced executives accustomed to evaluating businesses in terms of scalability and profit. One of them was Henry Moseley, Theranos' chief financial officer. His arrival at the company marked an important stage, because it was precisely specialists like him who gave the startup additional weight in the eyes of investors. A Silicon Valley veteran, Mosley almost always wore a rumpled suit and stood out because of his laid-back manner and the piercing gaze of his green eyes. His appearance and behavior created the image of a man who had already seen countless startups, rises, and collapses, and who was not easily impressed by grand promises. He grew up in Washington, D.C., earned an MBA from the University of Utah, and moved to California in 1970. That move proved decisive because California at the time was becoming the ecosystem that would later be known as Silicon Valley, as later became clear, for good. Over the years, he not only became part of that environment, but also secured a stable place within it, working with companies that shaped the development of the technology market. His first job was at Intel, the world-famous microprocessor manufacturer and one of Silicon Valley's earliest companies. Working at Intel gave him an understanding of how major technology businesses are built and how innovation is scaled. He then went on to head the finance departments of 4 IT companies, taking 2 of them public. That experience made him a specialist capable not only of evaluating the potential of projects, but also of guiding companies through difficult stages of growth and investment raising. In short, Mosley joined Theranos as an experienced financier, and his presence in the company was seen as yet another signal that the startup was moving to a new level and beginning to play by the rules of big business. Theranos' top management team inspired exceptional confidence. Kemp had spent 30 years at IBM. Diana Parks, the chief commercial officer, had 25 years of experience at major pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. John Howard, the senior vice president, had previously run a Panasonic subsidiary that manufactured microprocessors. It was rare for such a small startup to bring together executives of that caliber. But for Mosley, the decisive factor was not the board of directors or the star-studded management team, but the enormous scale of the market the company was targeting. Pharmaceutical firms spend billions of dollars every year on clinical drug research. If Theranos could establish itself as an indispensable link in the chain of drug development and commercialization, and managed to capture even a small slice of that gigantic spending pie, it would hit the jackpot. Elizabeth asked Mosley to prepare several financial projections for potential investors. She did not like the first figures he calculated, so they had to be revised upward. The new numbers made the CFO somewhat uncomfortable, but they still remained plausible, provided the company performed flawlessly. Besides, venture capitalists, to whom startups turn for funding, know that companies often inflate their projected figures. Everyone did it, and everyone was used to it. Investors even came up with a special term for it: the hockey stick forecast. Imagine a graph shaped like a hockey stick at first. Profits barely change at all, forming the shaft of the stick lying flat, and then a miracle happens, and the curve begins to rise rapidly and steadily. The only thing that troubled Mosley was the fact that he understood nothing about the technologies the company was working with. That was why he preferred to refer all potential investors to Dr. Chemical Engineering John Carreyrou, the co-founder of Theranos. John and Elizabeth had met in the laboratory of Professor Channing Robertson at Stanford. As part of the demonstration, John would prick his finger, squeeze out a few drops of blood, and place them into a white plastic cartridge the size of a credit card. He would then insert the cartridge into a small desktop device that resembled a toaster. The device was called a reader. It extracted data about the composition of the blood from the cartridge and sent it wirelessly to a server, which in turn analyzed the data and returned result. At least, that was how the whole procedure was explained. During the demonstration, John would show on the monitor how the reader pumped blood from the cartridge. Mosley did not fully understand either the physics of the process or its chemical basis, but in the end, he did not really need to as chief financial officer. He was satisfied as long as the system worked and produced a result, and it invariably did, and that was precisely where the main problem lay. Over time, Mosley began to have doubts. The results being shown to investors looked too perfect. Inside the company, employees were increasingly confronted with the fact that the device was not capable of performing tests reliably. Many tests either produced errors or failed to work at all. but these details were carefully concealed. When Mosley tried to dig deeper into the technology and asked uncomfortable questions, he encountered resistance. He was not given full information. Access to the laboratories was restricted, and discussions were quickly redirected toward strategy and scaling. At some point, he realized that the company was deliberately misleading people. And soon afterward, he was fired. But to the outside world, the story was unfolding differently. Elizabeth Holmes continued to cultivate the image of a visionary. The black turtleneck, the deep voice, the confident public appearances. She was often compared to Steve Jobs. She promised a revolution in medicine: fast tests, minimal intervention, accessibility for everyone, and investors believed her. The company's board of directors looked less like the governing body of a typical tech startup and more like a political club. Former ministers, generals. Among them were Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, and James Mattis. People with enormous influence, but without any deep understanding of biochemistry. Their presence created an impression of reliability and seriousness. The company entered into partnerships with major pharmacy chains, including Walgreens. Theranos devices began to be installed at blood testing centers. To ordinary people, it looked like a breakthrough. You could give a finger, prick blood sample, and get dozens of results in a short time. But inside the company, something very different was happening. The real technology did not work the way it was claimed to. Instead of using a revolutionary device, tests were often run on standard laboratory equipment made by third-party manufacturers. Blood samples were diluted, which distorted the results. Sometimes the data was simply adjusted by hand. Employees who tried to speak out about this were either fired or placed under pressure. The company tightly controlled information. Strict non-disclosure agreements were signed, and an atmosphere of fear and isolation was created. The turning point came in 2015. It was this moment that marked the point after which the success story began to turn rapidly into a story of exposure. Wall Street Journal journalist John Carreyrou launched an investigation. He became interested in the company's activities and decided to find out how closely Theranos' claims matched reality. He spoke with former employees, reviewed data, and asked questions the company could not answer clearly. Gradually, a picture began to emerge in which the company's promises increasingly diverged from what was actually happening. His article became the first serious blow. The publication not only drew public attention, but also made investors and partners question the company's reliability for the first time. After the article was published, a chain reaction began. Information spread quickly, and interest in Theranos' activities grew sharply among the media, experts, and government authorities. Regulators turned their attention to Theranos. Investigations began to confirm or disprove the claims the company had made over the years. The inspections uncovered numerous violations. It turned out that many processes did not meet the stated standards, and the technology itself worked nothing like it had been claimed. The test results were deemed unreliable. This meant that patients could receive incorrect information about their health, posing a direct threat. The company was banned from using its devices, and Holmes was barred from operating laboratories. From that moment on, it became clear that the company's collapse could no longer be stopped. The company's valuation collapsed to almost zero. What had recently been worth billions turned out to be a fiction. In 2018, Theranos officially shut down, and in 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud. The court determined that she had knowingly misled investors, exaggerated the capabilities of the technology, and concealed its real problems. A story that had begun as an attempt to change the world ended as one of the most high-profile financial scandals of the 21st century. And perhaps the main question in this story is not how one young woman managed to deceive investors. It is why they believed her. Because behind this story lies not only personal ambition, but also a systemic failure, a combination of greed, fear of missing out, and blind faith in a charismatic leader. Theranos was not selling technology. It was selling hope. And that is exactly what made the deception so vast.